What's up, guys? I'm getting some playlists going, and so this will be another video in the timeline subject. And this is going to be based off Anatoly Fomenko's work, History, Fiction, or Science, and a new chronology, as he calls it. So this came out a few years back, and this guy is a Russian mathematician that compared events such as solar eclipses and this and that in historical events with Scaligerian chronology, which we'll get into in a minute, and said that no, there's no way that this could have happened in this place at that time. And this was the basis of the theory of a lot of videos out there saying that there's been 1,000 years added to the timeline since the time of Christ. So this is a huge volume of work, and we're only going to be able to cover a little bit at a time. Let's start with explaining Scaligerian chronology. The chronology of ancient and medieval history in its present form was created and, for the most part, concluded in a series of fundamental works of the 16th and 17th century that begins with the writings of Joseph Justus Scaliger from 1540 to 1609, and he's known as the founder of modern chronology as a science. For the most part, the body of Scaliger's work was concluded by Dionysius Petavius from 1583 to 1652, who just happens to be a member of the J order. I can't say it, so I'll refer to them as the Society, as in the Society of Jesus. So these two guys in the 16th and 17th century laid the groundwork for all of the ancient chronology that everyone uses to this day. However, it's believed that the foundations of chronology were laid by Eusebius Pamphilus and Saint Hieronymus, allegedly in the 4th century AD. Here you see a painting of Eusebius dated 1415, and he says it's worth noting that Eusebius is painted wearing typical medieval attire of the Renaissance epoch, probably because he lived in that period of time and no earlier, despite the fact that Scaligerian history ascribes Eusebius to the 4th century AD. It's interesting to note that his famous work titled The History of Time from the Genesis to the Nicene Council, as well as the tractate by St. Harmonius, weren't discovered until late in the Middle Ages. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've come across a painting that was made either hundreds or thousands of years after the event that it's depicting, and also the crazy amount of quote-unquote Roman writers that somehow disappeared for the 800 years of the Middle Ages just to resurface in the 15th, 16th centuries. Now get this, not even 50 years after Petavius, a different member of that society, Jean Hardouin, who was a historian and archaeologist, considered the classical literature to have been written in monasteries during the preceding 16th century. In 1902, the German Robert Baldorf wrote in History and Its Criticisms, proving that not only ancient history, but even that of the early Middle Ages is a forgery of the Renaissance epoch and the subsequent centuries with the use of nothing but philological arguments. Just so you know, philology is the study of ancient languages and their progression. So he just argued the points that, hey, there was no way this was written when you guys said it was, just based off the style of the writing. Now, this next bit I find interesting because he gives a completely different account of the founding of Rome as to what most of us has heard about Remus and Romulus being founded by the she-wolf and all that. Anyway, according to Hellanicus and Damascus, who are supposed to have lived in the 4th century BC and whose opinion on this matter was later supported by Aristotle, Rome had been founded by Aeneas and Ulysses and named after the Trojan woman Roma. Several medieval authors concurred with this as well, as we see in this miniature, named the Trojans founding cities, and it lists those. One has to remark that it represents a medieval scene. Thus, the foundation of Rome occurs immediately after the Trojan War, which both Aeneas and Ulysses took part in. Fomenko points out this means one of the following. The foundation of Rome took place 500 years earlier than is generally thought, or the Trojan War occurred 500 years later than thought, or the chronographers are deliberately lying about Aeneas and Ulysses founding Rome. According to historian N. Radzig, the matter here is that the Roman manuscripts have not survived until our times, so all our presumptions are based off whatever the Roman annalists have to tell us. But even here, we run into the major difficulties, the principal one being that even the annalist material is represented very poorly. Now, to me, that would make perfect sense if, in fact, there was 800 years of basically no writings whatsoever between the fall of Rome and the medieval historians, but that doesn't appear to be the case. Because in the 19th century, two prominent historians, Hocart and Ross, published the results of their research proving that the famous ancient, quote unquote, Roman history by Cornelius Tacitus was really written by the well-known Italian humanist Poggio Bracciolini. And here you can see a list of the so-called ancient authors that Poggio just happened to discover and publish during the Renaissance. And in most cases, detailed analysis shows us that the obscurity of the literature's origins and the lack of documentation concerning its passage through the so-called Dark Ages leads one to suspect that none of these texts had really existed before the dawn of the Renaissance, 16th century, 17th. And finally, in about 1420, the Milanese professor Gasparino Barziza decided to undertake a rather precarious endeavor of filling in the gaps in the incomplete collection with his own writings for the sake of consequentiality. However, before he could finish this volume of work, a miracle occurred. A forlorn manuscript with the complete text of all the rhetorical works of Cicero becomes unearthed in a parochial Italian town by the name of Lodi. So this guy decides he'd fill in the blanks just for continuity, and then miraculously, oh hey guys, I found what I was looking for. Now I've got the originals. Oh my god, he'd have made a great YouTuber. Subsequently, the irrecoverable happens. The original of the collection, the manuscript of Lodi, becomes abandoned since no one wants to confront the textual difficulties it presents, and finally gets sent back to Lodi, where it disappears without a trace. Nothing is known of what happened to the manuscript since 1428. The European philologists still lament the loss. Now, he gets into dating biblical events, and I don't want to make this video too confusing because that one is going to derail your train of thought. So I'll do that in a different video. But he points out some of the things that I almost did a video on in the past, like looking at old paintings of Jesus and the city that he's portrayed in. It looks nothing like what our conceptualization of Jesus in Jerusalem is. So for now, I'm just going to do a shallow dive into the subject, not going that deep, but look at this portrayal of Nimrod, King Nimrod, and Babylon. Now, I guess one could argue that they just looked out the window and decided that they would portray an event from 2,000 years prior to what they were seeing out the window. I also want to do a video on architecture at some time, because according to YouTube, everything is Tatarian, but what we're looking at is obvious Gothic architecture in the background, and you can follow this progression. You can tell which churches came first, and they liked this idea and used it over here. Anyway, this is a photo portraying Jesus carrying the cross that I took at the mission in San Juan Capistrano. So this painting is from the 1800s or earlier, and look at the background of what should be Jerusalem, right? That's row after row of 2 to 3 story stone houses as far as the eye can see down through there. And it looks very much to me like what we would call Roman architecture. But the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrow in modern Jerusalem, looks like this, with almost Muslim Levant style architecture. Yet most of the Renaissance paintings portray more of a Roman style architecture in the background. Now, this could just be because none of the artists had actually been to Jerusalem and had any reference point to base their artwork off. I don't know. Like I said, that's a deep subject to get into. But they are definitely portraying Nimrod as a giant in this here depiction. And if you zoom in here, they're saying that this is the Tower of Babylon. And then you look up and you see the angels coming down to confuse the languages. So here they're calling it the Tower of Babylon. So where did we even get the Tower of Babel? Another very interesting depiction here is the top is showing scenes from the siege at Troy, and the bottom is showing the picture of the founding of Paris. How do these even wind up in the same depiction, the same sentence, the same paragraph when they're supposed to be thousands of years apart? In the top, you see the fleet sailing for Troy, and they all look like medieval knights on board the ships. Well, what Fomenko is suggesting, and what I've came to the conclusion of through my own research, different avenues, is that the events of our quote unquote ancient history were not that far back in the past. And I think the historical events of quote unquote ancient times happened just prior to the catastrophes of the 14th century that could be even closer to our period of time than the 14th century. It could be as soon as 1480. Again, very deep subject that I'm not going to get into right now. I'm going to end off with Plato, though. Here we're looking at a bas relief from the Chartres Cathedral, allegedly built in 1140 AD. And they're depicting Pythagoras and Aristotle, a couple of pagans from 1500 years prior. That doesn't make any sense. And Aristotle is famously a student of Plato. So the ancient Plato is supposed to have been the founding father of Platonism. His teaching allegedly falls into oblivion for centuries to come and is revived by the famous Neoplatonist Plotinus, allegedly in 205 AD. The similarity of his name of that of his teacher is purely accidental, of course. I do like Fomenko's sense of humor. He's very sardonic, sarcastic. And then the Neoplatonism disappears again from 2000 AD all the way up until the 15th century by another famous Platonist, Gemisto-Platon. The medieval Platon is supposed to have revived the ancient Platonism, having been an avid advocate of the ancient sage Plato. Furthermore, it is only in the 15th century that Plato's manuscripts were unearthed. Another miraculous discovery of an ancient artifact just in time. So then the medieval Platon founds the Platon's Academy in Florence in the image of the ancient Plato's Academy. Both Plato and Platon write utopian works. Gemisto-Platon is reported to have been the author of famous tractate on laws, which sadly failed to reach us in its entirety. However, the full text of Plato's tractate by the same title did make it to us. Then he goes on to list several other famous doppelgangers. You know, there's 2 or 3 different Dionysiuses, like the Dionysius Batavius, who finished Scaliger's work of our Chronology of Ancient Times. A series of prominent Roman lawyers ends with Irenaeus Modestine, who died in 244 AD. And then after 900 years of no law or anything, then Irenaeus is active as well, of the same name, doing the same things that the Irenaeus of 900 years prior had done. Anyway, that's probably enough to absorb for right now. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll definitely swing back around to this subject at some point in time. Peace out.